Thank you very much, Sudhaji. I'm looking forward to this panel, for we're discussing something which is integral to the functioning of any establishment, and in a school establishment, even more so. To my panelists who come from their own world of knowledge and their institutions in themselves, I've had the privilege of being on panels with some of them before, so good to see you again. Ms. Bindra asked for easy questions. She's not getting them. There are no easy questions when we're talking about school leadership. What we do impact thousands of students, and actually impact thousands of teachers as well. It's these students who are in our schools who will eventually go and teach some other generations. And the first founding block for them of how do you teach is going to be the experience they had as a student of how their teachers taught them. So our responsibility is not just for students in our care right now, but students who are probably even yet to be born. I plan to keep my narrative rather short and hear what panelists have to say. But I can't stop myself from repeating something I've said often. And I borrow a little bit from Gustav's conversation a little while earlier when he was talking about importance of teachers. And often I've seen schools don't invest in their teachers for their fear. What will happen if we invest this money and the teachers leave? To those managements, if they're listening to us today, imagine a scenario that you did not invest in your teachers and they stayed. So with that as a basic thought, I want to go to the senior most lead, the man who saw future, Mr. Shomie Das, and ask him this question, for this is something he's done many, many times in his life. Sir, when you are looking for a promising school leader, can you tell us some things that you are spotting there, like a hack of sorts? What is it that you're looking for? How do you get it right? You're still muted, sir, if you unmute yourself.
Yes, I'm not sure that I get it right always, but actually, there are many of my colleagues on this panel here and elsewhere who I've served with and who had some responsibility when selecting. So I'm very delighted to see you all and meet you for the first time, Dr. Arunabh Singh. I've heard a lot about you. Now, the problem with me is that I'm way past the use by date. And so I really am a little bit old-fashioned and don't think in the way that all you modern guys do. That's how I was taught and that's how I experienced, so that's how it's going to be. But in selecting a leader, let me say that the first thing that I sense or I look for and try and make a sense of is how child-centered a person is. You cannot lead a school and the children who make the large part of the school without yourself being partly a child. And that really means how much participation you have with the kids in the school. Today the situation is that there are schools of 3,000. The principal has very little time to participate with the kids. She's usually, and I say you she because most of the principals I know are she. They are bogged down with administration of all kinds. And so I worry a lot about that, because if the leader is not in touch with the kids, sometimes, the reason why I have enjoyed myself is that when I meet a kid, I know that kid. I know the kid, I know the parents of the kid, and so on. Of course, I ran schools which are much smaller than the ones that you people have now. So being child-centered and being able to participate in games and mountaineering and rafting with them is a very, very important part of a good school leader. Unfortunately, they don't have any time to do this, but even so, if they can possibly participate with the kids, it certainly helps the school be thriving. The second important thing is the school teacher, the principal must be a good teacher. That is a very important issue which often we forget. And I know principals who have not taught very much. And if they're a good teacher, they will teach themselves as principals. They will be seen in the corridors of the school carrying notebooks which they have corrected. They will be seen going into a school, into a class, well prepared and holding the attention of children. Again, principals don't have time to do that anymore. And that again bothers me greatly that, either children, our principals have got different goals, or that things have changed so much that they're not required to teach. But as a leader, unless you show how good a teacher you are, how can you lead? I just don't understand this. Anyway, there we are. I think a good principal, a leader has to be a very good teacher. The third important issue of the of school leadership is that he has to be very tuned to the needs of his teachers. He must remember that those very people who he's leading he was one, or she was once herself, and that often is forgotten. And so you lead as a leader, and you order, and you do various things which are very top down, instead of building a team and going along with them, and actually being a colleague of the teacher, rather than a boss. And when you do that, then teachers come and talk to you and chat with you and sit in groups with you, then it I think, creates a good community. I used to, for instance, always go into the common room, teachers' common room, at break and have a cup of tea. You keep your ears open, you hear things which you wouldn't hear otherwise. And then your ears cock up and you say, I better look into that. So being in communication with teachers is very important and a very much a needed thing nowadays, which I'm afraid, again, teachers, the schools have become so large, the teachers, the principals don't have time for that. And lastly, the principal generally has to be a good administrator. And here, two things are very important. One is to ensure that he delegates. He delegates to his colleagues and not have everything under him. He delegates all sorts of things like timetabling. As you know, we do that. But delegating programs like school matches, delegating other things like the dramatics to certain groups of people, so that these continue without your always having to poke your nose. And the other quality of an administrator is that she must be aware of the finances. I'm afraid our teachers, our principals, are not given that responsibility that, look, this is your job. You have to ensure that you budget properly and spend the money properly. And the principal should have the strength and the power to demand from his management, our management, that, look, this is what I need and this is what I have to give, and the management then works towards that. So these are the four qualities I feel elaborate on later, I feel are required for a good leader.
Right. Thank you very much for these opening remarks, sir. And you've set the chessboard absolutely right for the question that I plan to ask Nargis. Uh, Nargis, there is a qualification to be a teacher in our country of 1.3 billion people. We call it the B.Ed, and if it's early years, we call it NTT. We don't have a qualification to be the school principal. And often people find themselves teacher, 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 long enough teacher, now a leader. Now, lucky are those who are in the team of a school principal who's been wanting to hone them. And not so lucky are those who just made the shift from one school to the other, and now they're expected to lead. So with Mr. Shomie having done the identification of promising leaders, if you have to groom these identified resources, what are some things that you would keep in mind? And I'm also taking into context that you're working in the Middle East, and the time that people spend in the Middle East are relatively shorter in comparison to what we see in India, if that is true at all. So main question is, how do you groom these identified resources for them to take on much bigger roles?
Thank you, Dr. Singh. Ms. Shomie, good morning, and it's always a pleasure to see you and the co-panelists as well. So that's an interesting question, and being here in the Middle East especially, we have a transient population, and it's really difficult to sustain and retain teachers. But having said that, our school itself has one of the lowest attrition rates in the region. It's only 4.9%, which by any yardstick is low. But there's a lot of effort, obviously, that goes into sustaining that. And I think the key is in growing people. And that's one of the key roles of a head of school, to identify talent and then to grow talent. But I think, just going back to Maslow's hierarchy, the first things first, you've got to take care of their basic needs. So our new teachers get a social mentor as well as an academic mentor. And I think having the right mentorship is key, because that really gives a sense of purpose and direction for especially the people who are new to the job. Having said that, I think we spend a lot of time in identifying, the strengths and areas for development. And based on the initial identification, and we don't really rush that process at all, because some people demonstrate slowly. They're not in a hurry to demonstrate all their skills at once. And that comes with them settling into a new place, etc. But once we've identified them and we feel that this person requires some more attention, I don't think we're in a hurry to dismiss the person who's not efficient, because they've got the skill set. And once you identify, I think, the skill set a person has, if I'm understanding your question correctly, Dr. Singh, it's not really about growing leaders right away. It's about grooming the identified resource. And so we find there, for example, we have a young man who's very, very passionate about the Duke of Edinburgh, and that's his strength. So while we're developing him as a teacher, we're building his confidence by giving him more and more responsibility. So I think that magical, affirmation that you're good at what you do and you're darn good at what you do, and go ahead and make your mark in that field, that develops confidence. And then they're ready to take on any other area for development that we identify for them. For example, the triage system that's put in place, making sure that your outstanding teachers are first co-planning and demonstrating, and then your second level, and then the one who really needs the help goes in third, and that happens within the department. But that's about developing the teacher and identifying the specific areas for development and developing them. On the other hand, when we discover that somebody has a potential for leadership, then we appoint leadership whisperers, if you know what I mean, and that's somebody who's really strong at grooming other leaders. And we give them opportunities to shadow, for secondment. We give them, we put them on top of the quality cycle chart. We make sure that they get an opportunity. We have a distributed leadership model. So, they get some leadership responsibility or the other. And I think the big word is the O word, the opportunity to grow. And once they've got that, they just fly with it. So in a nutshell, I think take care of their basic needs first, identify their strengths and give them opportunities to grow there. Work with them on we have a really good performance management system in place. They're given their KPIs, they're given their goals and areas for improvement, and then we take it from there. I can go on and on, but I'm pausing here.
If time allows today, I'm going to come to you about your performance management system and also talk about performance-related pay with teachers. That's one of my favorite topics. I stand against it, but only if time allows. Right. So I want to hop on and go to Maldives now. And but before I do that, I would say one thing that I can see clearly happening well at the Sri Ram Universal School is a lot of those things that Shomie sir spoke about. I see it happening on as the run up to this webinar itself. There has been demarcation of resources, there has been delegation, there has been trust, and as I see the 4 people from the school above these tiles that we have, that's such a brilliant example of how you can be a leader while you're not in the steering seat always. So that's 2 extra points to Dr. Jyoti Reddy. So let's go to Maldives and find out some more of this predicament that I have always felt that happens when somebody moves from a teaching position to a middle leadership position. So in some ways now that middle leader is a messenger of the leadership, and the staff room is saying, well, actually you were one of us till yesterday. And so this is a position with great discomfort sometimes. How do you see, Mr. Saleem, how does this change happen, and what is perhaps the best way of this transition? And would you agree with me that being a middle leader of a school is actually more complicated than being the senior most leader of the school?
Well, thank you, Dr. Singh, for this great question, and thank you, the management, for giving me this opportunity to share the platform along with a lot of other great educationists. That's a very interesting question, and I think it also depends on how you look at it. The middle managers, in many ways, we call toxic handlers. They are the jam and butter that is sandwiched in between the 2 pieces. And then again, when we want to implement certain policies, certain pedagogical aspects, then they are also there to make sure that the teachers actually do it the right way. It's a difficult position for the school management and also for the middle manager to be in that position, because not long ago they were with these teachers, sharing jokes, doing all sort of things that a normal teacher does, and then becoming the head of that particular year group. And then asking them not to do certain things that this particular gentleman or the person has been doing along with these people makes it a little more difficult for the person. But having said that, I think what is more important is that the school community knows that there is a clear succession plan in the school, and every one of them has got an opportunity to move up the ladder, so that it doesn't become a very difficult thing for them to understand, because they know at some point some of them will be moving up the ladder and they will be given the opportunity to become the leading teacher, and then moving on to the next level to become the assistant principal, and finally landing to the position, the principal. So in that regard, I think the school management or the promoters of that particular school group should be making it very clear to the school community that the school is looking for internal succession plan rather than looking for hiring plan for these positions, because sometimes the management finds it more fitting to bring somebody from outside and putting that person into that position, because they don't want to create a conflict within the teaching community of that particular school. But that doesn't always work that way. I think the philosophy of the school and the culture that the school has put in place may not go very well with the new person with a different DNA. So in that regard, I think this is a question that will be asked, I think, in the discussion. So I'll just stop it there. For me, I think it's an advantage, provided that the school staff knows that there is a succession plan in place. Thank you.
Thank you very much for picking up the implant versus the ingrown conversation. It's quite an important conversation in all school boardrooms, and also the complexity of the middle leadership. People in the middle leadership position who are in this webinar today, we feel your pain and understand what you do is difficult, but it's critical to the functioning of a school. I want to jump to Mr. Gumeet, Gumeet Bindra now, and I can, because of my relationship with her, I think I can ask a couple of extra more digging questions to her, and this is what you get when you know me for too long. So, Ms. Bindra, my question to you is as follows. So you have gone from, you've done this entire journey of joining as a teacher, being a non-teacher, coming into education, joining as a teacher, middle leadership, school leadership, led one of the most premier schools of the country, and then decided, oh, this is fun. I want to open a school on my own. And so now you find yourself on the other side. And I'm sure when you were a professional, there was one thought that you had towards school management. And now that you're on the other side, and we don't know which is the devil, but you, of course, have a very different frame of mind when you look at the school organogram. So my pinpointed question to you is, now with your school founder trustee hat, when you're recruiting for a new school leadership team, and in your case, you don't have an option of growing it because you need to scale up fairly fast, what would be some very key factors that you are looking for? And I would hope that you would answer this in first person for people on this webinar who may be looking for these jobs some point of time in the future.
Thank you, Arunabh, for a question that I would be able to answer with all my heart into it. So it won't come from any read literature. So I think that's what I will lend to this question.
And so while you're at it, if you can also share, this is what I used to think when I'm on this side, but now this is how my perspective has changed.
So fortunately, Arunabh, my perspective hasn't changed too much, because fortunately, even for the schools that I was working for some reason, I thought I owned them. So I perhaps gave it exactly what I'm giving to my school now. But the big shift that has happened from then to now is that as a leader of my own school, I feel the autonomy to do a lot more. Now, when I say autonomy to do a lot more, there has to be a direction. Even for a school, for a very established school that I have been a part of, you'll be surprised that we did not have an articulated vision statement for that school. So the school had been running for a number of years till we articulated a vision statement to take stock of the direction that we were heading in. Now, as a founder trustee of my own school, the one thing that I look for when I am recruiting people is how much are they aligned to my vision. Now, when I was, and that's where the difference is, when I was heading a school that did not really belong to me, the vision of the school was a very collective vision. Not that it's not now, but now I have the privilege of developing that vision with people who are getting associated with me at this stage of setting up the school. So I have the privilege of aligning all the stakeholders without any prejudices of having been part of an institution that is already running on a certain track. So that is a very big difference that I can see. But I would reiterate what Shomie Das sir has just mentioned about looking what you look for in leaders. When he talked about child-centric and he talked about must be a good teacher, must be good at communication and all of that, I was actually trying to see how much of that is part of a visionary leadership. You know what I mean? And I realized that a lot of this, when you're looking at, say, child-centric education, you're actually looking at a visionary leadership. When you're looking at being a great administrator, you're perhaps looking at instructional leadership. Now, as a head of school, whether I was with another school or whether I'm here now, I think this balance between instructional and visionary leadership is really what I have stood for and is what I'm practicing. Not much change, honest to God, Arunabh, in what I perceived then and what I'm perceiving now. It's just that I'm feeling the pain a little more. The pain of the challenges is a little more, but the ecstasy and gratification, I must say, was equal then and is the same now.
Right. Thank you very much for that response. I hear you. And when you started talking pain, it was the image of the school bank account that came to my mind, but that might just be coincidental. I want to go to Mr. Sagar Vishwas. So we've owned up that we don't get management trainings once we start our journeys with schools. We get an understanding of how does this school culture work, what is expected of me, but there is no management training, except for little bits of some bits of motivation that we can gather from webinars like these or some residential 2-3 day programs that we go for. Now, in that context, we're not really being trained on how do I do a succession plan. Like succession plan is actually a terminology that we come to realize in the fag end of our careers. That's when the first time when we start feeling that need. I've met school principals who with a lot of pride say, I have made 10 school principals in my life. There was a lady, Ms. Rita Kapoor, she says, I've made 23 school principals. And she was mighty proud of it to say, this has been my contribution to the field of education. And I agree with her. So for people who are in that zone right now and who have to create these succession plans, could you give us some pointers of what would these look like? And would you also agree with me that people who don't create succession plans are those insecure people who feel that if they did, they would become redundant?
Thank you. Great question, Dr. Singh. Yes, you already brought out one point about succession planning in your question itself. So I'm not an educator by training or by profession. Being industry agnostic allows me to work in different industries, right? And one of the easiest ways to build succession planning or building leadership is to look at what's happening in other industries and model them in. Now, we could look at, the military. They have a model of leadership development, works well for them, might not really work for educators. The manufacturing industry probably is not the best example for leadership development, but the knowledge in the IT industry does seem to have some very interesting models. And when we look at succession planning and how to do it, one interesting thing would be to also borrow a little bit of from what Shomie Das sir said, right? He identified a few very prominent competencies for a leader, right? And the devil or God or whatever it may be lies in the details. So to give you an example, when I was currently doing a very similar exercise for a construction MNC, we started off looking at the competencies for a regional director or regional head of operations. And the job description or the roles and responsibility was a 10-item list. And when we actually sat down, we were able to expand that list into about 320 lines of competency statements for them. So something as simple as communication skills had about 38 sub-criteria, right? So once we know what exactly we are looking for, the how will then follow. So the moment we've identified the what, we could look at, is there a way of subjectively or objectively measuring an individual on each criteria? And then looking at plans to train them or coach them and build those competencies. So I just got muted. Am I audible?
Yeah.
All right. All right. So I think one great model that I could get a sense of from was what Ms. Nargis Khambata already said. They have processes in place. There are plans. There are competency development plans, things like that. So measurability is one very important thing, and that's how one could really build. So the knowledge industry has, for every post, for every career band. So if you have to break a school leadership into bands, let's say from teachers to coordinators to, let's say, vice principals or heads of departments to principals. A competency like communication, or let's say system level thinking. Now, we could probably use only 4 or 5 criteria at system level thinking for a teacher or a coordinator, but the principal could have about 20 plus criteria on how they have a system level thinking. Similarly, when we talk about financial sense or financial capabilities, then obviously the ability to look at profit and loss and numbers and ratios and so on. So there are harder skills or attributes that can be measurable, softer ones which can be given, let's say, a subjective scale. And
I'm going to come back to you, Ms. Vishwas, for some more explanation of what you're saying, but I want to put this in context back to the educators who are with us today. And when you were speaking what you were speaking, I was reminded of this book called Made in Japan by the Sony founder, Akio Moriyata. And he says, when in Sony, when in the manufacturing companies that they were growing, they would allow one team member to apply for an internal job posting in another part of the company, and thereby increasing their skill set. And interestingly, he also mentioned that if there was a team in which more people wanted to migrate to another team, they would start to look at the middle leadership of that team to say, something must be wrong that so many people from this team are wanting to change to another team. So there is something that we need to do with the middle management. Coming back to this context, I appreciate your industry agnostic view, and that's why it is a fresh perspective. But I want to connect this to something with Mr. Shomie Das had said earlier, which was this direct correlation between being a good teacher and a good school principal. And I want to put both of this to Nargis and make her life difficult. Nargis, is there a direct relationship between subject expertise and educational leadership? Are you going to stand on the podium with your hands stretched out and say, subject expertise is extremely important to be an effective educational leader? And if your answer is going to be yes, how do you bridge the gap? If you choose to say no, the answer is much simpler.
So the answer is yes and no. I'm not making your life difficult, but the answer is yes and no. It certainly helps to have to be a teacher. And I agree with Shomie when he said that, you have to, and I myself teach. Because I'm busy, I don't teach my subject biology, but I teach value education so that somebody can replace me. But I think being in that classroom and really, getting to know the mood and feel of the people, the children especially, and your teachers is so important. But having said that, I do know, and the Doon School is a shining example where Mr. Gulab Ramchandani came in and successfully led the school, and he had no background in education at all. So some people are successful at it, and I think they have a different skill set that makes them so successful. But I think by and large, as an educator, I would prefer that, it's a teacher all the way who goes up the leadership ladder. How do you bridge the gap? I think we pull out our best teachers and we make them supervisors or educational leaders. And I think that's, and without any sort of, the training comes later. And we've had a couple of spectacular failures on that front. And we've surely learned from that mistake as to how you need to prepare somebody mentally first before you put them in that role and upskill them. The good thing is that teachers already have three important things that are, three important skills that are really important for educational leadership. They're good communicators. They know how to read the mood in the room, because reading the mood in the room, if you don't have that skill, oh my God, you can be the best leader, but you'll spectacularly fail because you'll say the wrong thing at the wrong time without reading the mood. And teachers have empathy. So they're already armed with three, key skill sets that you actually need. But coming back to bridging the gap, and that's where the performance management comes in. And I just wanted to, I put it in the chat, but I'm saying it again, Dr. Singh, that by performance management, I didn't necessarily link it with pay. I linked it with, so that the performance model, management model that we follow has a three-yearly check-in. And that check-in is to just say, these were the goals. So they are pre-agreed goals that you set yourself, and put that in writing. And those goals are not only to do with, either teaching or educational leadership. It's also about self-management, and it's also about managing your time and your family commitments, etc. Because that also is important, right? And once you said that, 3 times a year, we have check-ins where we have a professional dialogue. What can we do to support? How can we make sure that you achieve what we agreed that you will achieve? So their KPIs are set at the beginning, and then we have supportive conversations. But onboarding and training are 2 key things, I think. And even before we bring somebody on board, I think and that alludes to what I was saying earlier, once you identify talent, then you tag a senior leader to that person, so that, you become a leadership whisperer, and you guide and mentor the person through it. Opportunities for secondment, trying on exactly did you say Toyota model? No. Sony, the Sony model. And that is, have them do different things in different schools. We even send them out to different schools on different leadership assignments, so that they get a flavor of it and really come back. But I think the most important and key factor is co-creating the vision with them. Alluding to what Gumeet said about, the vision. And what is the vision for the school? Do they understand it? And do they co-create opportunities to make sure that that vision is being realized? And I think once they aligned with the vision and what needs to be done, we've cracked the code, and they're successful.
Thank you very much, Nargis. That was very helpful. I realize that we're running a little short in time, partly because we started a little late, but I don't want that to be our excuse of finishing late. So I'm going to ask you some more biting questions to my panelists, but also request you at the same time to keep your responses brief. I want to jump to Mr. Shomie Das again. A lot of what you said in your opening remarks has gotten echoed. It's time for you to come clean and give us a simple answer. Would you stand for internal succession or an external selection when you're setting up a new school? Or actually, wrong question. Would you stand for internal succession or external selections when you are selecting a leader of an existing phenomenal school? You're still muted again. So you're muted.
I get your question, but it's a very difficult one to answer, actually, because so much depends on where you're going, what your vision is, and at that point of time, what the situation is in the school, whether you have a leader or not. And so, there have been times when we've taken internal people and it hasn't worked out, and there have been times when we have taken internal people and they worked out very well. So I don't think there is a straight answer to that. I feel that much depends on the circumstance.
Sure, fair enough, sir. Thank you. Thank you for being honest. I wasn't intending to send you easy questions. It's not every day that I get on the panel people who are an institution in themselves. So no point throwing easy questions. But thank you for your response. I want to go to Mr. Saleem. Sir, what would be your 3 things that you're doing as an organization to retain the best of your staff?
That is a question that sort of all of us here have to cope with and deal with. Retention is an important issue, but on the same time, you must allow people to go. In other words, there has to be a sort of control valve that some people go out and some people come in. Otherwise, the school becomes a dead organization.
Right.
And I always feel good when people do say that I've got another job and I'm going. Please go, because you're taking my philosophy with you and you're spreading that. But retention, I think there are 2 or 3 things which are very important. First, I think that money is not the issue. Money may be an issue sometimes, or, but basically it's not the issue. The most important issue is how much the teacher feels she belongs, how much she feels that she is wanted, how much she feels that you are there to help her, how much does she feel that the institution is giving her a great amount of value. Now, how do you do that? How do you give a lot of value? One of the things is you must ensure that teachers get trained and upskill their abilities. And that's very important. We don't do that often enough. We don't have a plan of skilling teachers more and more. It happens. If it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. But there's no plan within the school's employment structure. The HR people don't have this plan in place, usually. Some do. And the other thing is that how much does the school care for that teacher? For instance, the teacher has difficulties. Can she go in the school bus? And the answer is, why not? You must facilitate the teacher as much as possible to make her life. And today, what high pressure lives people have. And most of the teachers today are ladies, and they have even higher pressure because of their commitment to their husbands. Most of them are committed wives as well. So it's very important for the school to take this into account. And I find that I've had teachers leaving and coming back because they suddenly find that although they were getting maybe 5,000 rupees more, what they were not getting is and were getting in those schools is very much more valuable. So I think teacher retention is a very important issue that principals have to deal with.
Thank you,
I
sir.
don't know whether I can give you 3 things, but I think.
Thank you very much. I want to make throw an even more difficult question to Mr. Saleem. Mr. Saleem, there is a teacher that you're eyeing who's come from Mr. Shomie Das's school. What are you planning to put on the table to make that person stay?
Thank you. It's a difficult question, but I got an easier one first. Yes, I think to start with, I'll just say that the school leadership is always the tip of the iceberg. And what is happening beneath is not seen. It can be a toxic culture. It can be a lack of vision. It can be many other things because we have a board of directors, we have promoters, we have people who are owning that particular school. So there are a lot of times that these leaders who are creative, who are ambitious, who would like to do many things that are relevant to the times, may find it a little boring and also may not have that opportunity to make use of the potential that the person has. So in that regard, I think one has to look at the aspects that are beneath this particular leadership scenario. Going back to your question, what would I put on the table when someone joins from another planet, maybe? Right. I think what is important is to align the person with the philosophy of your institution. If there is a mismatch between the person who comes to your school and the school existing environment, then the philosophical alignment should be the first and foremost priority for the school management or the school leaders. So that's the one and the very important thing that I would recommend.
Thank you, Mr. Saleem. Let's put this very simple question to Mrs. Bindra. You get 1 minute to answer this question, and you're going to give us 3 pointers. There is a teacher who's been at Mr. Shomie Das's school for 15 years and being looked after like his own child. What are 3 things that your school is planning to put on the table to make their change still worthwhile?
So the first thing that I would do is make sure that I put in every bit of my last molecule in my body to get her on board. Because if she's been with an institution like Mr. Shomie Das, there'll be a lot for me to get there. So the first thing is to help that candidate understand that while she has learned a lot with Mr. Shomie Das, it's now in her own personal growth to now take that, like Mr. Shomie Das said, you're going to another school, you're taking my philosophy there. So if I can get that candidate to see her own growth and her own professional development in complete alignment with what she can end up with in a win-win situation, a win-win for my institution and for her as an individual, I think that is the main thing. I may not be able to give you 3 things, but if I can get that candidate to align and see the match between her individual goals and my organizational goals, I think I'll achieve it. Then 3 things means offering her whatever she's looking for is the easy part.
Gumeet, sorry, Ajay, Miss Dr. Singh, can I just add? Gumeet, it might be worth considering working on Shomie to convince her to come.
That I already got Shomie to say that he would say, please go, you're carrying my philosophy there.
Lovely. You tag teamed on me. I will come
Gumeet
back on a
habit.
later date.
Gumeet, I'm afraid, has this habit and this quality of being able to persuade me very often. So I think she will succeed each time getting her. Let's teach her.
I realize we are overstaying our welcome as a panel, but I want to ask this one question to industry agnostic Mr. Sagar Vishwas. What's your elevator pitch for school leadership, for school management? You get 60 seconds, sir. 60
seconds is a long time in an elevator, so thank you. So, all right. So, as a consulting firm, what somebody like us would do is essentially, rather than reinventing the wheel and going through the pain of trying and doing trial and error, we offer, let's say, an outside perspective that can, of course, get deeply entrenched in understanding those pain areas, because that's something that we do as a consulting company. And really finding out the best tools and of course, work on a long-term basis. So change doesn't happen over a few weeks or one tick box kind of a training program. It's typically a 2-year-long engagement to really see visible and measurable change. So that's something that I would invite leadership from all schools or any other organization to do. Look long-term to build that leadership pipeline.
Have patience. Look for test matches and not T20 cricket is what you're advising school management, and I agree. And with that, without even attempting to wrap up all the wisdom that has been shared, I've made my notes. I'm sure people who've been listening in have made theirs. It has been a fantastic experience for me as a moderator for this panel. I thank Dr. Jyoti Reddy and her team for creating this platform, and I hope that we meet again in person. And Nargis, I hope that I get to learn from you and from the person in your background as much as all of us would aspire for. Thank you very much for your time today. Back to Dr. Jyoti Reddy for her concluding remarks.
Thank you so much, Dr. Arunabh. That was a power-packed panel indeed. There was no overstay of the welcome. We could keep listening to the panel for probably a couple of hours more. And I'm sure that the leaders and aspiring leaders in different educational institutions have had a gripping close to 45 minutes and also a 360-degree view of what's going into creating a robust succession plan. Whether you're the one making the succession plan or the one aspiring to be the leader, I'm sure you have had a very close look at both sides of the coin. Thank you so much, Dr. Arunabh, for steering the discussion in such a systematic and interesting manner. Honestly, the way you articulated every question and the way you added your own flavor to the discussion was admirable. I'm for sure going to watch the recording and model a few nuances from there. I now request Dr. Jayaraman to summarize the key takeaways from the discussion.
Yes, sir. Thank you. But that is the thermodynamically impossible task. You have asked me to do it, because building great schools, succession and selection of right leadership. So as I was going through Arunabh Singh's introductory remarks, he mentioned the return on investment and the sunk cost fallacy that is operating in the educational field. Now, he also delineated the middle leader problem. And if you look at the new degrees coming up from the emerging economies like Estonia, where the MBA in education has the teacher component, be it as well as the MBA. So we have a new generation of people formally educated in the semantics of management as well as that of education. They can also do exceptionally good classes in mathematics and physics and biology. We in the Department of Atomic Energy as a system, see, we should compare the education industry with the knowledge industry. The IT industry has been covered by Sagar Vishwas because that was a manufacturing industry whose working model of succession and elevation. So that would be a good model for this. But other knowledge industries like the Indian Space Research Organization, the Department of Atomic Energy, Department of Biotechnology, they also have knowledge workers being promoted for middle level and senior positions. So there is a method in the madness they follow. And it is important. And throughout the world, if you are looking at individual institutions and how the management tries to develop external or internal leadership, that's a different question. But if you look at the 300 million students of this country to be educated by a large number of teachers, schools, and principals, we should have a national policy for education. And in that national policy, both the Kakodkar policy of Technology Vision 2035 and the NEP 2020, they have given the methodology for appropriate skill development for this. So that's one question I have been thinking about it. And the professional development like the lawyers, like the doctors, and for the engineers and scientists, there is a method in doing that professional development. For example, professional development of teachers is a well-developed situation. But we normally like to pick up experience from the field. But this picking up is the one, and then we are being evaluated. But are we being evaluated by a panel? Or are we being evaluated by a contextual narrow area? So that is where one problem comes up. Individuals grooming. Yes, there is a limit to that. Every person can, I have been speaking about the Greikuna's formula in the morning. How many people can you groom? If the people have been formally educated, it is easy to do that. That's one answer. But I was deeply and emotionally touched by Shomie Das's old world charm, where he spoke about the priorities. It's a classical scholarly wisdom, intensely distilled from his personal experience, that child-centeredness, the primary single critical variable, as far as education is concerned. And he also said, in fact, that's where I heard jarring voices, the principal must be a good teacher. Now, there are differences of opinions. I could find, as you go up in the administrative, from a leader to a steward or administrative, you have a large spectrum of things. But if the principal is not a subject expert, not a subject expert, a fossilized subject expert, but one who is contemporary active with the field, it will be very, very difficult to get intellectual recognition from your colleagues. If the chairman of the Atomic Energy Commission doesn't know nuclear physics, it will be very difficult for him to draw the attention of his colleagues. So subject expertise, there can never, ever be any compromise. This is my personal view, because I've been working with the knowledge industry for the 50 years across a large number of scientists and engineers. And there is domain knowledge, there is no subject. But domain knowledge, the deep domain knowledge, that is to be matched by a breadth of knowledge, adjoining areas. So we have a mindset for leadership, and in fact, in my department, many of the scientists have been trained in the institutes of management, IAMs, so that we developed a formal relationship. But in the case of teaching fraternity, in fact, Technology Vision 2035 is more concerned with how to produce leadership for these 300 million students in this country, so that India is ready, India is future ready at 2035. I'm not going into the formalism that has been taught about both by Kasturi Rangan as space scientist, both and Anil Kodkar, a nuclear engineer, who have developed their methodology based on their experience for the national education plan. So that is one aspect I want to bring it over here. Then we have been speaking about visionary leadership, and then there have been a mention that literature, we have a large literature. In fact, we have an information explosion on and journals on school leadership. All said and done, we now at the national level, when we are preparing the undergraduate, the first degree for teaching, it should have the elements rightly mixed with that. That would be the solution for the overall problem. And individually exceptionally great people, they will create islands of excellence. But averageness is attractiveness. And we do need at a national level a leadership all through the educational sphere who can bring the nation at a horizontal level. That's my personal view. And it was an immensely interesting experience to sit through these extremely chiseled expressions of from their personal experiences. And there is a lot of anecdotal data. But the plural of anecdote is not a data. But unless you have a large number of anecdotes, it will not be possible for us to have a data-driven decision making. So we saw the both sides of it. The extremely anecdotal one, very, very personal and absolutely true, and distilling that into numbers and numeracy so that national guideline for us. After all, we should think of the nation, and the school is one aspect of a great nation. Thank you.